Good morning. Thank you. Welcome to Seattle Community Church. We are so glad to have you here with us this morning, especially if you are a visitor or new, or this is just your first or second time. We are so happy that you have chosen to come and worship with us in this place. It is the second week of a 4-week series on worship. What it is, what it means to us, how it shapes us and changes us. Last week, we heard from Pastor Fred, who talked about how we are in a season of harvest here. That is a time of celebration. And one of the ways that we mark celebration in the church is through worship. We were created to worship God. It is a fundamental part of who we are. And it leads us to the question then of what is worship? What does it mean for you and for I to have it as part of our daily lives? I have to admit that when I think of my top 5 sermons I'm excited to preach, worship is not usually in it. I feel like I should let you know I love preaching stories like the youths who get mauled for calling someone bald, miracles of Jesus walking on water. But worship, it always seems to take me a little bit to get my imagination involved. And I think partly that is because just like you, I have begun to see worship so often in my life as simply what we do here on a Sunday, as a Sunday service. And we've turned the word into a noun, kind of this thing we go to. But in its truest sense, that's not what it is. It's not a place we go on Sundays. It's not a certain number of songs that we sing followed by a sermon and an offering and a blessing. No, it is something that is so much bigger and so much more all-encompassing than we can begin to know. And our text this morning is going to help us to reconsider our conception of how we relate to worship and its role in our life. Hear the words of the Lord in Psalm 8. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set the glory in your heavens through the praises of children and infants. You have established a stronghold against your enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. When I consider your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set into place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands, and you put everything under their feet. All the flocks and herds and the animals of the wild and the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea and all that swims the path of the seas. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. The word of the Lord. I remember the first time I saw the Northern Lights. I was a small child living in Alaska, and I had had a sleepover at a friend's house that night. And long after we had gone to bed, her parents came bustling into the room, and they woke us up. And they started to put us into our coats and our boots, and wiping bleary eyes, we tried to figure out what the heck was going on. And before long, and before we knew it, we were tromping through the snow in the backyard and complaining about being woken up, when finally they said, "Look up." And as I raised my eyes, I could not believe what I was seeing. Because what was once the dark night sky was now ablaze and lit with color that shifted and stretched as far as my eyes could see. It is the first time in my life that I remember experiencing awe. I've had plenty of these moments since then. Whether it is looking at the Milky Way from a rooftop in a house in Haiti, or the sunset on the French Riviera, or looking at dry lightning storms in the mountains of Colorado, or holding my friend's baby, or sitting with a man as he tells his wife that he's going to stop his treatments for cancer. In all of these moments, the word that I use to describe how I feel is awe. It is a total body experience of being completely in the moment and completely aware of both how tiny and insignificant you are, and yet how very much you've been given. And I bet most of you have had a moment like this as well. When you realize just how big the universe is and how small you are in it, and yet, look at what we've been given. So the psalmist is experiencing a moment of awe, or better yet, a moment of real worship. The thing that we often forget or we miss about worship so often is that it's not something that we attend. It's not really something we go to. It's something that we experience in the course of our everyday, mundane lives. And when we cultivate a practice of worship in our lives daily, we begin to discover that it's not just about God, it's about us as well. And rather than just being something we do for God, it becomes this exchange in which we realize we have been given so much more than we give. So worship at its core centers us. It resets our perspective on life and the world. The words of the psalm contrast the finite nature of humanity and the infinite majesty of God. Worship gifts us with the ability to know both God and ourselves better. And when we do this, we can then locate ourselves properly, below the creator of the universe, and yet not unimportant ourselves. Cared for, each one of us, by a God who knows our name, crowned with glory and honor, and responsible for the care of this world. Now, we don't have to look very far to see what happens when worship is not a cultivated practice in our life. See, because it's part of our DNA, because it's part of who we are, it is unavoidable that we're always going to worship something or someone. And when those things aren't God, rather than being centered, we find ourselves being pulled off balance. And the world is always tempting us to worship unworthy things. And far too often, the church hasn't done much to combat this. See, we've grown comfortable in our routines. We know what's going to happen, and so we become reluctant to step outside of our comfort zone. And over the course of centuries, the church has begun to focus so much on rules and on order that reverence has been driven out and replaced with repetition and comfort. Now, as much as it kills me to say this, one of the most common replacements for the worship of God in our time is the worship of sports. Like, I get it, the Seahawks are playing, so you're all here, well done. We can look around, see who's missing, and make them listen to the sermon.